Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Alexandru Floristean from Hydrogen Europe. I'm very happy to have been invited by the Energy Delta Institute to hold this webinar to present the European Green Deal and to talk about the crucial role hydrogen has within the European Green Deal, especially in these very special circumstances. I would like today to begin by setting the agenda. I want to present what was at the beginning, what is, and what will be the Green Deal in the next future. I want to discuss what can hydrogen do for the EU Green Deal, and what can hydrogen do for the European Economic Recovery Program. I would also want to discuss what can the EU Green Deal and the European Economic Recovery do for the hydrogen industry. Together, and hopefully when Energy Delta Institute will come, we will try to also answer your questions. When you first registered, you gave a long list of questions, and we'll try to answer those as well. The presentation for today is saved on our website, on Hydrogen Europe's website. You will be more than welcome to download it from there once the webinar is finished. I can see that our CAN moderators have still not been able to join. In which case, I think I will try to begin my presentation, and we'll join them as they come in. I want to say that 2019 has been an amazing year for the hydrogen industry. It has really been unprecedented. There are many indicators that show that the time of hydrogen has finally come. I will focus just on one. I will focus on just one of them, and that is the membership growth of Hydrogen Europe. Hydrogen Europe has grown by 40% in 2019. It's welcomed almost 40 new members. And in just the first 4 months of 2020, it welcomed 25 new members. We now represent more than 166 industry companies from the entire value chain. From pure hydrogen technology providers of electrolysis, fuel cells, to players involved in the hydrogen distribution chain, in its logistics, to OEMs, and finally to industrial end users from all the sectors combined. The number of national associations in our membership is now at 23.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Leon. Hi.
I think so. Hey, there you are. Good. I'm good. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. Yes. I'm actually very glad you joined me. I was afraid I will have to do this alone.
No. I will support you wherever I can. But I heard that you already started, so that's good. I'm not sure if you see the slides, but then I can help you with that as well.
We are only stuck on the first slide, so I did not have the chance to move them since you control them.
Do you see them? If I move them, do you see them or not?
No.
Okay, then I'll wait a second, just continue with your talk, and we'll continue. I'm very sorry, guys. This is the first time we had so many participants, so perhaps that's the reason. Continue, Alexandru.
Yeah, as a bit of background, there's been more than 1,000 people registered, and right now we have 650 people connected. So we're very glad to see this interest in hydrogen. Unfortunately, it causes some problems on the technical end.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
When you do have the chance, just pick up with the presentation.
I will do
as I continue. I was mentioning that the national associations now number 23, so we cover almost all of the EU and especially some key neighboring countries. Our sister organization, Hydrogen Europe Research, has almost 80 research organizations. Our mission is to ensure that there's no emissions. As simple as that. Our aim is to decarbonize Europe's economy using clean hydrogen technologies. This is what we want to do. And we are very, very, very proud of the fact that our membership is so broad and diverse that it allows us to look at hydrogen from a systemic perspective, not from one single point of the value chain, not from one single point of view, but to understand how it can help the energy sector, the entire energy sector, the EU policies, and how it can be best placed in the service of EU policy and our decarbonization goals. Now, when it was launched in December 2019, many people perceived the EU Green Deal as only being a roadmap for how to make EU sustainable and eventually carbon neutral. However, the EU Commission from the very beginning presented it as much more than this. They presented it as EU's strategic direction, politically and economically. President von der Leyen called it the EU's new growth strategy. Concretely, the Green Deal details planned actions, legislative and non-legislative, for months and years to come that have the overarching goal of reshaping EU's economy and making it carbon neutral. What makes hydrogen special in this context is that it can play a role in multiple elements of this strategy. Let's firstly talk about carbon neutrality. Simple as that, carbon neutrality cannot be achieved, is impossible without hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most effective solution, and in some cases the only feasible solution for hard-to-abate sectors. Hydrogen and electricity are the only carbon-free energy carriers are the only carbon-free energy carriers. Both can be produced from fossil energy resources as well as renewable energy resources. And both carriers will be necessary in a sustainable energy system and are complementary to each other. Another element of the Green Deal is sustainable transport. In sustainable transport, hydrogen is the most promising solution for heavy-duty vehicles and buses, for maritime and aviation. In the rail sector, it proves already that it can be an effective solution for non-electrified lines. And despite some criticism, it has a crucial role to play in passenger cars as well. For fleets, for consumers requiring long range, and for the simple reason that a world with 100% battery electric vehicles is simply not possible. Just imagine how a recharging station on the highway in August will look like. Not to mention what kind of grid infrastructure would be required for that kind of fleet. We will either have a mix of battery electric vehicles and fuel cell electric vehicles, or we will continue to see internal combustion engines for a very long time to come. When it comes to another element of the Green Deal, ensuring that Europeans have access to clean, reliable, and affordable energy, it allows the integration of variable renewable sources in a manageable way. It helps stabilize variability. It increases overall system efficiency, and it avoids losses, curtailment, transport, or storage losses. Finally, another element of the Green Deal was leave no one behind. And the Commission made it clear that the transition should be done in a way that protects socially those most affected. And finally, I want to say that hydrogen allows us to keep flying, allows us to keep driving, allows us to still buy goods and consume goods, because it means decoupling our CO2 emissions from economic growth. Even more so, it creates jobs and opportunities in Europe. It's a value chain that will employ Europeans, not put them out of a job like other climate solutions. But enough about what we say about the Green Deal. Let's look at what the Commission says about the Green Deal. So we are the hydrogen industry and we can be accused of bias, but let's look at the own words of the Commission. So in their communication of December 2019, they said very clearly, they want to see hydrogen networks. The Commission commits to the decarbonization of the gas sector. This sends a clear signal to the gas sector that the Commission is ready to act on this. Power to gas, CCS, CCSU will take a higher position on the EU agenda. The energy integration package is given clear priorities in terms of decarbonization of gases, in terms of market, in terms of support. It also gives a mandate to integrate higher share of renewables into the greater energy system. They also mention in their own words that they want to decarbonize energy-intensive industries. They mention steel, chemical, cement. They explicitly mention hydrogen as a clear priority in these areas. The Commission recognizes in their communication the central role for hydrogen in decarbonizing the industrial sector, and beyond this, the importance of an industrial policy supporting priority areas such as hydrogen and fuel cells. They also mention that they want to ramp up the production and deployment of sustainable transport fuels. They don't specifically mention hydrogen, but obviously hydrogen is one of the sustainable transport fuels that can be used. They do mention ports. They mention explicitly aviation. They mention the introduction of the EU ETS for road transport, but importantly, as a complement to the CO2 emission standards, not a replacement. They also mention partnerships in support of research and innovation on transport, and explicitly mention the upcoming partnership on clean hydrogen, the successor of the current fuel cells and hydrogen joint undertaking. If there was any doubt for anyone, the commitment to an R&I partnership on clean hydrogen is made explicit in the highest political level document of the Commission. In addition to that, they also mention national energy and climate plans that they will need to be revised and made more ambitious in light of carbon neutrality. This is great news, as each revision of the NECPs brings more opportunities for hydrogen. In the revised NECPs that are published this year, we've analyzed most of them, all of the ones that were made available so far. The use of clean hydrogen is mentioned more than 700 times. 90% of the countries that foresee a role of hydrogen, a larger or smaller role, within their NECP. The fact that they will be revised again gives us a chance to make sure that that number grows to 100%. They also mentioned the need to direct finance towards green investments and to avoid stranded assets. This can have a major impact on what types of investments receive finance. It can future-proof investments, and it will make sure that all investments are compatible with the reality that clean hydrogen is basically betting on. Finally, the Commission, in their communication, explicitly mentioned new forms of collaboration with industry and investments in strategic value chains. This was already in December 2019. For example, they explicitly mentioned the important projects of common European interest, the IPCEI process. This process involves Hydrogen Europe heavily, and we have been supporting DG GROW from the very beginning, set up the right framework to support the hydrogen value chain and to include a IPCI on clean hydrogen. However, we cannot have any discussion today without addressing COVID. COVID-19 has the potential to change everything. We were asked at the very, very start of this crisis, just as lockdown measures hit Europe, just as we were all scrambling to shut down our offices and work from home, to fly home and spend the lockdown with our families, or anything else, just as those measures were being implemented, to make an in-depth analysis of the economic impact on of all of this on the hydrogen sector. To highlight just how exceptional this situation is, one of the main authors of this analysis, my colleague within Hydrogen Europe's intelligence team, Gregors, was actually in quarantine when drafting it. He was not ill, but as lockdown measures were imposed, he had to spend 2 weeks in self-isolation when returning to his home country in Poland, where he wanted to spend the lockdown with his family, and where he is now without being able to come back to Brussels. Now, this analysis was very important to us because we identified the risks the potential damage and issued very clear recommendations to the Commission for the short and medium term to mitigate the worst impacts. In our report to the Commission, which was delivered internally to the highest level of the various cabinets, we highlighted three major risks. In the short term, especially because there are a lot of SMEs that currently form the hydrogen industry sector, there's a major shortage of liquidity, and there will be a shortage of liquidity due to a steep drop in revenues. More long term, the greater risks is that due to the fear that climate and environmental policy commitments will take a back seat, large companies which were planning major investments in clean hydrogen technologies and especially betting on hydrogen may abandon or severely scale down those plans. For the same reasons, investors which were investing and betting heavily on the growth of the hydrogen industry would be less inclined to finance those planned projects and that planned growth. These were the three risks that we identified and we communicated to the Commission. Another thing that we did at that time and communicated to the Commission were our recommendations. What can we do to mitigate the potential damage of COVID and the economic fallout in the current situation? Our first recommendation, and probably the most important one at that time, was to give clear and immediate signs that European climate environmental objectives will be maintained, will even be raised, and to give reassurance politically, publicly, on hydrogen's role within the EU strategy. We also issued a number of other recommendations with respect to link its financial supports to environmental commitments, to provide direct support to the hydrogen value chain in the short term to avoid the liquidity losses, to provide certainty on the continuation of the RNI partnership on clean hydrogen, and to take legislative actions to unlock the first commercial markets through market incentives that can be acted upon as quickly as possible. Now, to their immense credit, and absolute credit is due to this European Commission, to the commissioners. They have been in contact with the key industry, including ours, including with Hydrogen Europe, throughout this crisis. And we have organized webinars with Commissioner Kadri Simpsons, with Vice President Timmermans, with Commissioner Breton, to discuss all of these aspects, to discuss the future. And to their credit, the Commission not only gave clear signals that climate commitments will remain at the center of EU policy, but showed that they believe hydrogen would play an important role. Let's go through quickly just the headlines of what happened in this period. The EU Parliament issued a resolution. EU Industrial Recovery Plan has to focus on climate growth, jobs and research. Mr. Frans Timmermans emphatically defended the Green Deal and promised a green recovery. A few days ago, Commissioner Kadri Simpson stated that hydrogen will be central to energy system integration. It will amplify the impact of both other pillars of the energy policy strategy, which is energy efficiency and renewable energy. Going beyond our leaders in Brussels, the executive director of the IEA tweeted that hydrogen electrolysis are ready for the big time and should be played in recovery plans to push their costs down and make them the cornerstones of modern energy systems. Commissioner Breton, responsible for the internal market, made it a priority to identify the European industrial ecosystems that will need finance. Well, Mr. Breton, you need look no further than the hydrogen sector. The economic recovery and the Green Deal means that industrial policy in the EU should support sustainable European value chains that support our climate goals. Very, very few value chains fit the glove as well as the hydrogen value chain. The hydrogen value chain is strongly linked to Europe, to European leadership. We have global leadership in many of the parts of the value chain, not all of them, and we need to protect that leadership. But for example, if you analyze the global patent registrations, you will see that Europe is at the center. And at this point in my presentation, we get to the breaking news category. Yesterday afternoon, President von der Leyen, in her speech at the European Parliament plenary on the new multi-annual financial framework and the recovery plan, singled out clean hydrogen among the 4 top priorities of the economic recovery plan. In her speech, she outlined for the first time a new strategic investment facility that will be used to support key European value chain, and explicitly mentioned clean hydrogen as one of the 4 value chain in her speech. Now, on our side, on the industry side is ready to play its role. It's ready to deliver on our promises to support the Green Deal. In our recent paper on the 2 times 40 gigawatt initiative, the industry committed to build up that capacity within the next decade, with huge positive impacts on climate and jobs. It's estimated that around 82 million tons of CO2 emissions can be avoided as a result of this, and close to 150 or up to 200,000 direct jobs would be created by this. Just to put that into perspective, this is the equivalent of absolutely removing and not replacing them with anything else, 60 million cars on the EU roads. And to be fair, 2 times 40 gigawatts is both huge and grossly insufficient at the same time. And to explain that paradox, what does 80 gigawatts of electrolysis mean? Well, on one side, it's more than 480 times what is installed today worldwide. So that's a growth of 480 80 times. However, it would be enough to provide enough fuel to satisfy only 16% of the global shipping needs. That puts into perspective the amount of quantities that are needed to fuel this transition. However, this quantity will also be enough to satisfy more than twice the need for hydrogen for all European refineries in case we still use fossil fuels in 2030, which, as I mentioned earlier, if we only invest in battery electric vehicles, we will still be needing refineries in 2030. Any renewable energy producer will tell you that more investments in the power grid are necessary. It's sort of a greeting. Instead of hello, they say we need more grid. They would tell you that they would be able to produce more renewable power and increase the share of renewables, decarbonize more if only they had more grid. I agree with them. However, decarbonization efforts should not be constrained by the limits of the power grid. The power grid should not be a bottleneck for the speed at which we decarbonize our economies. This is why we need both hydrogen renewables, which is hydrogen produced from direct connection to renewable energy, bypassing the grid entirely, as well as blue hydrogen, as well as decentralized hydrogen production, which will use grid electricity. Now, on the other side, I promised I would tell you what the Green Deal can do for hydrogen. We also need strong policy measures going forward. There are many aspects which are important, and the issue is complex. But I want to focus on 2 today. And I'll start with infrastructure. In a time of crisis and economic downturn, any economist will tell you, make huge investments in infrastructure. In 2008, 2009, 2010, we invested in digital infrastructure. This has allowed us now, in this crisis, to work from home effectively, to welcome 1,000 people in this webinar to be able to do our jobs remote. Without it, we would be rioting in the streets. Be honest with yourself. What would you have done 2 weeks ago if you lost internet access? It's time to invest in the hydrogen backbone, in the backbone for production, in the backbone for transport and distribution, in ports as international transport hubs, and in a network of hydrogen refueling stations. The second measure needed is to stimulate both supply and demand, and to do so with differentiated approach in different sectors. Let's talk about the supply side first, because maybe it would be less controversial. Yes, member states should put in place financial support for the production of clean hydrogen. We find ourselves now where the renewable power sector was maybe 10 years ago. With the right instruments in place, we can follow the same pattern and become competitive against fossil-based solutions. But we need a shot in the arm. That is undoubted. And yes, there is room for business models that envision the production of electricity and hydrogen at the same time, selling electricity to the grid when it is expensive and producing hydrogen when electricity is cheap. But at the same time, we need to develop dedicated hydrogen production sites that produce only renewable hydrogen from renewable power, because as I mentioned earlier, we need to decouple decarbonization efforts from the limits of the grid. We cannot afford to put cables everywhere. And I know it's much more complex than this, but to simplify, it is basically 10 to 20 times more expensive to transport electrons than to transport gas. And B, I'm not sure we want power cables everywhere. They don't really look nice. They don't look nice in my living room there in the corner. I have a big ball of cables. They don't look nice in our countrysides or fields or in our cities when we have huge transmission cables everywhere. Going back to demand, we need to stimulate demand as well. There is no way around it. I have to say it, mandates and targets work. Many people wouldn't appreciate them or don't appreciate them, but they work. The ETS as an instrument is good, but not enough. The targets in the RED II are not ambitious enough. The way the RED II is written now, 14% renewable transport can be achieved with the stroke of a pen, statistically. We are likely to see mandates for a decarbonized or renewable gases in the gas grid, in the aviation sector. We will see percentages of alternative fuels in aviations. We will probably see mandates of renewable energy in steel or other industrial applications. Already, to give you an example, the French deal with Air France requires Air France to increase the uptake of sustainable alternative fuels to 2% by 2025. Some will argue, and they are probably right, that this is not enough, 2%. But I want to highlight that the mechanism is already in place. And to finish my presentation, the world has slowed down for a few months. All energy consumption, except for renewable power, has decreased. We estimate that probably this year we would see CO2 emissions expected to decline by around 8%. This is more than all the declines in the past decades put together. This is not a good news because the rebound in emissions may be larger than the decline unless the wave of investment to restart the economy is dedicated to a cleaner and more resilient energy infrastructure. We need to avoid this. So with that, Leon, I apologize for not giving you the chance to introduce at the beginning, but please go ahead. I give the floor back to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've been told you can see me and you can hear me, so that's good. I apologize for the fact that we had some technical difficulties in the beginning, but I would like to thank you very much that you took it up. And now I think Alexandru cannot hear me anymore because I can't hear him.
I can hear you perfect.
You can hear me. Ah, okay, great. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for this great story. I hope I kept it up a little bit with the slides, because in the beginning I couldn't see you. Like you mentioned, this is the first time we have so many people joining our webinar, and I think that maybe causes a little bit of the technical difficulty that we are experiencing. So I'm glad you bear with us. I just wanted to say a few words that we're going to go into some questions. So I'm going to give you some questions from the audience and that we got right now. But in addition, I would like to mention that this is the first webinar that we do together with Hydrogen Europe. So this perspective you just gave is a bit more the higher perspective on the Green Deal and how it affects hydrogen, COVID-19, for example, how it affects hydrogen into production and projects. Second webinar we'll have goes more into detail regarding transport. So what are the chances of hydrogen in the transport sector? So the potentials over there. Third one, we'll focus more on hydrogen as an opportunity for an integrated energy system. I think that's also a very interesting one. So we'll go more in depth when we progress in the webinars. And the last webinar will be more on innovation and research and the agenda that you are making together with industry and also with the European Union, including some funding mechanisms. So I think that's very interesting as well. So not all questions will be answered right now because we have more information coming up. That's basically what I wanted to say. Let's just start, because it's a very interesting question. What is the biggest misconception about hydrogen?
Yes. The biggest
You can choose yourself.
No, absolutely. But the biggest misconception about hydrogen is that it's not efficient. And it pains me every time I see those arguments put forth by a large group of people who basically at heart want the same thing that we do, which is to decarbonize our emissions.
And
that is simply not true. What we need to look at efficiency is from a system efficiency perspective, the efficiency of the entire energy system. Of course, if you can produce, store, transport, and use electricity as electricity, you should do so. Makes no sense in that scenario why you would waste even 1% of electricity transforming it into something else. Of course. The problem is you can't. You simply cannot. And that makes the system as a whole inefficient. And that's where those arguments falter. And it pains me to see people going back to that argument more and more.
Yeah, I can imagine. Maybe it's also to do with the fact that some of these, especially if we go, because it's a transition, so especially if we go towards green hydrogen that we all want to go to, that you basically place part of the problem somewhere else. So you mentioned that the cables, for example, strengthening the electricity grid is not should not be the limiting factor. So that's very good. But then, of course, you need to have this green power somewhere to make the green hydrogen. So you still have to invest to a certain extent in these cablings, and maybe at sea. Perhaps that's something that people have a misconception about, that they feel that you do double.
I haven't really seen that to the same extent in that kind of criticism. But going back to that point, we've analyzed the situation in various countries with various degrees of detail. But I'll give you the example of Spain. What is holding back renewable power, the renewable power, not the hydrogen sector, the renewable power sector in Spain is the grid. There's a bottleneck there. People are lining up whenever a grid connection is being tendered out. They're lining it up. They're buying it. It's going, then the seller, in some cases, even sells it for hundreds of thousands of euros on the secondary market. That is the bottleneck. You would simply have more renewable power produced if you had a functioning hydrogen market. It would flow through hydrogen.
Yeah, that's a good one. So how do we make this market? Is that the first option? For most projects focus very far away on green hydrogen, I would say. Is there an in-between? How do we quickly make this demand happen so that we can start producing it as well?
The demand can happen. Fairly quickly within the time horizon of a few years. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about supply side measures and demand side measures. The demand side measures are the incentives for the industry to use gas, for the different sector to use hydrogen. Why would you? because it helps me decarbonize, because it helps me reach a target, either a CO2 reduction target or a renewable target, or simply a target for hydrogen. You have your demand side, you have your incentive. The other side, you scale up production through support to production. And you need to do both. You need to do both in order to be able to control, scale up, incentivize both production, give enough certainty to project developers, but also make sure that there's an outtaker, that there's a consumer demand for that product as soon as it leaves in huge quantities. In huge quantities, we're talking about scale, not talking about 10 buses, although I absolutely love seeing 10 buses. And we see more and more and more buses, and they look great, and they're winning Bus of the Year awards, hydrogen buses. But we're talking huge quantities here, and that can only be done through ambitious public policy.
Yeah. Basically similar to all the other renewable technologies, they need to be incentivized to a certain extent before they can stand on their own. Is there any role in that? You know, the Green Deal, of course, obviously has a big impact on that. Do you see that also in relation to COVID-19? Do you see this continuing? Is it increasing in importance? You already made that analysis, but is it really helping, or?
Let's be very honest about the COVID-19. There's so much uncertainty around everything right now that uncertainty itself becomes a risk. Our own analysis, which was as best as we could have done, it needed to go towards the Commission. I'll give you a figure from it. We estimated that the amount of investments at risk in the hydrogen sector is between 15 billion and 120 billion.
Yeah, huge numbers. Staggering.
This is the range. There's so much uncertainty that one cannot tell. Now, it all depends on what's going to happen in the next months. And I have to say, the last few weeks were very, very positive. They are going in the right direction, that our EU leaders are taking all the right steps in not falling back on our commitments, not forgetting what the bigger picture is, and that's promising.
Do you think that this stimulus that governments that also take out, so recently also in the news that people are, especially also in the Netherlands, they're thinking about, okay, we have to have more stimulus for our companies, but then we want to have some kind of return on investment on that, and that basically is also greening. Do you think that's an opportunity as well, that these billions floating around can go to the companies like you mentioned, Air France, that want to green quicker, and then also in hydrogen?
It is a major argument. It is a major argument for making sure that any bailouts, any support is given, A, under certain conditions, B, to the industries that you know will have a future and should have a future. Yeah. And not to cling on to the ways of the past. Yeah. President von der Leyen said it very eloquently yesterday in her speech to the Parliament. She mentioned that what we do today in terms of our economic recovery package will create debt that will be repaid by, I want to point towards myself, by young people.
Absolutely. We have to pay the taxes, Alexandru. Yeah. I
have to pay taxes, and I will have to pay taxes for a long time from now. And for younger people than me, for people that are just entering the workforce or are even at school now, they will have to pay that debt. We have to make sure that the choices we make also give them a return on investment, because they pick up the bill, and that means giving them a clear, a healthy planet and a healthy environment. And Ms. von der Leyen put it very eloquently.
Yeah, I think so too. Another question is more related to longer supply lines, so to say. So, I mean, hydrogen, of course, you can make it from several, you can make it from renewable power in Europe. As you mentioned, Europe has a strong position in that. Is there a place for these longer supply lines around the world? So, for example, Africa or Australia or other locations. Do we want to have that also in relationship with COVID-19, where we feel vulnerable in this long supply lines?
No, the answer to that is absolutely and unequivocally yes. We need to make use of that. There's no doubt about it. Let's look at Europe. Let's start with Europe. Europe is and always will be a net consumer of energy. We need to consume energy. We need to import renewable energy from where that renewable energy can be produced in the highest quantities at the most efficient at the most efficient price. Now, that gives us so many options in terms of our sourcing of that energy. It can be North Africa, it can be Ukraine, it can be Chile, it can be many other places, and of course it can be produced in Europe. But all those opportunities need to be leveraged. The 2x4 gigawatt initiative that I mentioned, that's why it's 2 times 40, because it's 40 gigawatts in Europe and 40 gigawatts in our neighboring countries that will be imported. And that's an opportunity for neighborhood policy, trade policy, growth.
Yeah, so you're talking about sustainable development for not only Europe, but also for outside Europe, to help them as well grow and be more self-sufficient in terms of economy.
Absolutely.
That's a very nice one. Just going back a little bit more to the somewhat technical details, maybe perhaps you can answer that as well, is there's a lot of questions about the grid. So how do we organize it in such a way that we can have hydrogen entering the grid, that there may be a mix? Is there a European initiative from Hydrogen Europe to make sure that it's balanced so that everybody has the same standards, for example? How do you see that?
It is an important topic. It will be the main topic that will be discussed in the energy integration package that will be developed. Now, Hydrogen Europe is working with Sensenelec, for example, on and with the entire energy sector, for that matter, on the definition of a standard for guarantees of origin. That is an important step of the process. On detailing priorities for standardization with respect to the hydrogen area, and especially the injection of hydrogen in the gas grid. All the answers don't exist yet.
No.
There is no
under construction, basically.
Yeah, there is no easy answer to this discussion. What is important is that this hodgepodge, this fragmented approach that exists right now between the different member states. Some places you're allowed to inject, some places you're not, some places you can go to 10%, other places to 0.1. It needs to stop. Yeah. It needs to stop, and it will stop. There will be a coordinated approach. However, exactly the tactical path towards a decarbonized gas sector in 2050, nobody has right now. Not even us.
No, of course, no. But I think you guys can play a good role in the middle, so to say, to at least start this kind of discussion to make sure, because technically it's fine, right? It's possible to do that. There are some adaptations to end users, to the gas grid itself, perhaps, but it is possible and it is doable.
It depends. The distribution system operator or the transmission system operator would have to study his network. In most cases, it is possible, but however, it depends. There might be some aspects of your network that may use certain materials that are not ready for a higher concentration of hydrogen. It needs to be. You need to know your own network. In most cases, it's possible. So, but I wouldn't say it as a blanket.
No. That's not what I wanted to say. But you're right. We need to be careful, of course. Yeah.
And with respect to end users, there are a number of, let's say, tricky barriers to overcome. One of them is CNG vehicles, and CNG tanks right now. But other user equipments, there are actually not so many barriers. In reality, the producers of gas boilers, of gas consumers, basically, they're working on products that will be hydrogen ready. So it's less of an issue that people would think. I'm not saying there are not. I'm not saying
no, but there's an opportunity as well. The fact that you can do this more easily than, for example, strengthening the whole grid.
Yeah. The opportunity is definitely there.
How do you see? Do you would like to have some kind of prioritization of industries, so or applications of hydrogen, if you move forward? Do you think that's a good idea, or do we just have to incentivize everything?
I understand the question very, very well. I'll turn that around a little bit. There is no sector that can afford to ignore it. There is no sector that can say, oh, we can live without it, thank you very much. There's almost no sector for which hydrogen can play a role that the sector can afford, it's fine, we won't do it. There isn't. Yeah. As I said, I took the argument of passenger cars because I wanted to make a point of it, which is the sector that says no thank you, or a lot of people says it's not true. Now, there's always a question of
maybe cost effectiveness.
Of cost effectiveness, of prioritization. And I think in some extent, market factors would play a role, and we will see naturally hydrogen going directed towards certain sectors more than in other sectors as a result of some market mechanisms behind it, simply because it makes more economic sense. But that's also why I said that demand side measures need to be sectorial driven. You cannot have a blanket approach, because you will not promote hydrogen in the aviation sector in the same way as you promote hydrogen in trucks or hydrogen in steel. It's not the same measure. And for a while they will then function as an independent market because of those demand side measures, even though hydrogen is and hopefully will be a commodity at that point.
Okay. Clear. Some interesting questions are also about blue hydrogen, and then also relation to the oil price. And then let's first tackle a little bit your view about blue hydrogen. Is that a step that we need to make? Do you see a future for that? How do you see that?
The reason, the answer to that lies in what I said earlier about putting the 2 times 40 gigawatt amount in perspective. It's huge and it's insufficient. It's 400 times more than what we have now. It's 16% of the supply, the energy needs of the maritime sector. We need for decarbonization purposes, we need blue hydrogen. Of course, renewable sources are better. Perhaps economically, it would even on the long term outperform blue hydrogen. I do not know how things will evolve. But at this point in time, you have to recognize the need for both, and
to make the market, so to say,
to create the market and to reach the objectives, to reach decarbonization objectives, and to reach them quick enough.
Okay, interesting. And I agree with you actually, but I think it has a place also to be quick, to make sure that you can effectively introduce hydrogen in society. How about the oil price? Because of course, also in relation to renewables, we had this question also a lot in general. In hydrogen, you could say that the low oil price is an opportunity and a threat at the same time. How do you see that? Is that something you take into account in your analysis, or?
We did take that into account in our analysis, and it's very interesting to say. On the short term, low oil prices makes the gap between hydrogen-based technologies or renewable-based technologies and fossil fuel-based technologies even larger. So it makes the business case for it even further away, because you have so much incentive now to consume cheap fuel. So on the face of it, you would say, wow, this is a huge risk. It basically moves the goalpost even further. On closer inspection, though, low prices for oil keeps investors away.
Yeah.
Why would an investor now choose to invest in new assets in fossil fuels when the price is negative? And when prices do eventually rebound and investors might be tempted to go back in, well, they've already would have lost some ground. Yeah. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty behind that. It's just a reflection on the mechanisms of what will happen. I don't know what will happen. Even we haven't really written anything in our report because we were very careful not to speculate.
Yeah, it can be. You're right. It can be both ways. Yeah? So it's hard to determine. But I think the interesting mechanism here is indeed also that the low oil price creates risk for people to invest in the more traditional systems. So you could get a crunch later on, but you can also have the opportunity and I think that, for example, Bloomberg also says that currently the investment in renewables outperforms the investment in more traditional systems, which in hydrogen can also be the case. So in that sense, it's an opportunity. Yeah, very nice. I think that we will leave it at this because there are a lot of questions, but they are more general, and also we will answer a lot of them in the following webinars related to transport, innovation, and system integration. So I would like to thank you very much for being here and taking up the slack from our technical problems at our end. Thank you for that. I would just like to mention that we will have this. If you want to have more information, then please join the following webinars with Hydrogen Europe. We also have another webinar planned from the Energy Delta Institute about will natural gas survive our this crunch, this COVID-19 and other threatening factors. If you now want to know more about hydrogen in general or more specifically, we also have a very nice online course planned 19 and 20 of May. Check our website and you can register for that. Alexandru, thank you again. I would really like to thank you for your very good presentation, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Leon, for the invitation. I look forward for the future collaboration with you on the other three webinars. Hopefully we without the technical difficulties.
Yes.
Because like I said, it was a bit scary for me.
I can completely imagine. I was also sitting here waiting until we could finally go, and I'm very happy that you picked it up. So I'll promise next time it will be better. Also, the questions that we have not answered, then we will send them. We will answer them, and we'll put them on the website of Hydrogen Europe, and probably also at our own website, so you can still download them together with the slides. Thank you very much. Excellent. And have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you all the attendees.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
For listening. Have a nice afternoon.